So this being the last session, I would like this to be as interactive and as much fun. Otherwise, like you saw me in the last previous edutech session, I may take off in another direction. And I will use this mic because my bones tend to jam up at this age if I sit for too long. This morning we heard Mr. Gita Veeravan speak eloquently about how Indonesia 2045 could look like. He also said that for all of this to happen, we need huge amounts of capital. Indonesia is a pretty rich country on its own when it comes to capital, but the appetite for venture risk or angel investment or startup investment is still low. That understanding is still low. I have been going city by city in Indonesia with my friend Harris here, trying to understand what the entrepreneurship system looks like. I have a few observations that I'll share. I will also show a brief presentation from my perspective, and then we'll open it up to the panel. One thing that I repeatedly say, and I've said that in my book as well, Get Funded Now, is that there are more people sitting with money waiting to invest than there are entrepreneurs wanting that money. It's just that you don't know how to get it. If entrepreneurs came to me and I said, me being the investor, that fine, I'll give you money, but I'll give it to you as a compounded convertible note bearing 8% interest waived off, capped at 10 years, convertible every year, they wouldn't understand a word. So they go into this market unprepared. So as much as we want to reach there and raise large amounts of capital from other parts of the world, not necessarily Indonesia, while our own system catches up, we need to calibrate ourselves to the rest of the world as well. Traveling across Indonesia, meeting entrepreneurs, I more or less noticed three key issues. One, the low level of financial literacy from an investor perspective. What is a valuation? How much equity to give? What is a convertible note? What are preference shares? That's one, which I'm addressing through Get Funded Now workshops across the country. We are going to go to 20 or 24 cities. Next, the lack of data. I just don't find enough data on the startup ecosystem of Indonesia. So we, as a company, are conducting a primary research survey of the startup ecosystem of Indonesia. And if you want a copy of that report, there is a sheet in the booklet at the end which will help you order a pre-order copy, an advance copy. The second skill I find, apart from the financial literacy, that entrepreneurs in Indonesia tend to struggle with is the ability to think scale and global. A lot of the startups are very localized. Nothing wrong in that. There's no problem being small, cute, and very profitable. But if you aspire for institutional funding, they want scale. And if you don't think about that, there's a problem, there's a disconnect. The third skill I find difficult in interactions or something that will hold people back from institutional funding is the ability to market themselves. That seems to be a problem. It's a problem even in countries like India, but people have overcome that over time. So you find these great ideas, very good entrepreneurs, immense talent. Wherever I have gone in Indonesia, I see immense talent. But the ability to put that across to a potential investor who's likely from some other region, there's a gap there. We are going to talk about future of financing, future of technology. I have prepared a short presentation to calibrate us. We saw these numbers in the morning. Indonesia has 1,591 startups. You know what is the more important statistic? And I say this in India as well, which has 4,000 startups. A startup being defined as a company that brings an innovative service or expands the market, not just another mom and pop store. The more interesting fact is that Israel, which is probably smaller than one of your islands, has more startups than India. That is the key statistic from that and key takeaway. If you look at our place, we keep hearing ad nauseum about e-commerce, fintech, edutech in Indonesia. But there's another very good initiative going on, the Bercraft initiative, which I'm very excited about, to bring out the talent from the design and non-tech side of it. Very few countries are doing this. And that is a core strength of Indonesia, and I don't see why we keep overlooking that. In the top 80 countries, this is a ranking of 80, and I'll get to a larger ranking later. We are placed about 43rd, and we have quite a distance to go. Our current reality, we are moving towards $1 trillion economy. We keep hearing that. We are demographically well placed. We have high adoption of mobile technology, high penetration of social media. We need talent for the technological leap. We don't have it. Our infrastructural ecosystem for startups and innovation is lagging behind. Our financial markets are not deep enough to fund startups and entrepreneurs. We have numbers in the startup game right now, not quality and maturity. Our startups are largely localized, but on the positive, we have a very keen and supportive political class. I saw a picture recently, actually this morning, mailed to me by Mr. Nagia, where the president of the country actually invited some of the top startups into the cabinet meeting. I haven't heard of another country doing this. So there is tremendous potential, tremendous energy, tremendous political commitment, but the thinking on the talent side, scale side, financial market side, these need to catch up. We are about 5 to 7 years behind where India is now. All these numbers only tell me opportunity. Overall, if you took all the major 137 companies in the startup ecosystem, we are probably 90th in that, and 16th even in Asia Pacific. So there's a lot of room to grow, a lot of opportunity, a lot of things to be done. But what is different in this fourth industrial revolution versus the first three? If we don't understand, we'll simply copy and paste the solutions of the past, which doesn't work. One, our society is moving from a necessity-based society to an opportunity-based society. That generally tends to happen when the per capita income starts crossing the $3,000 mark, which you have. And that's when you have this horde of entrepreneurs coming out with ideas of their own. We just keep speaking about how much land mass we have got. I hear that here, I hear that in India. How does it help? Really, how does it help? In America, you have all the startups concentrated on the two coasts. You have Israel, Latvia, Estonia, Singapore, Hong Kong, all startup ecosystems that would fit in a corner of Jakarta. Yet they are way ahead of us. Land mass is not relevant anymore. It is a localized ecosystem that you create that is required. So if you take a view of the full country and try to do everything everywhere, that's not going to work. Instead of focusing on invention, investors, from an investor perspective, what gets funded is innovators, not inventors. And lastly, just like we boast about land mass, we also talk a lot about how big our population is. Is that good or bad? All the countries I named, which have a better and more thriving startup ecosystem, they have minuscule populations. It is the number of talented people you have got that's important. Whether you can convert even 0.01% of our population here to do what they're doing, and then we would be leaps and bounds ahead. So just having a population is not good enough. Actually, it's a drag. You need the right skills in a certain class of population with ecosystems in particular areas. Why it matters? Future of job creation has been kind of outsourced to entrepreneurs today. That's because big government spending is coming down. The government has realized, not only here, across the world, that the days of large projects generating massive jobs is over. This aspirational, opportunistic driven society, a set of entrepreneurs, will create the next wave of jobs. Why it's also important is there's a race to digital dominance across the world, across boundaries, across geographies. China is resisting it right now. We'll see where it goes. It's also important because the very nature of human behavior is being changed by some of these disruptive technologies and companies. We have to decide whether we'll just be adopters or bring up companies that will lead the way. Social demographics are changing. We can see that as we urbanize more and more, become nuclear families, get more insular with social media. A lot of change is happening. Why it also matters is that 90% of the startups fail in the first 2 years. If we are going to push a large mass of our people towards risk-taking activity, we need to have a safety net to protect them. Otherwise, this job creation dream may turn into a nightmare very quickly. Why it matters is because there's a direct correlation between the global entrepreneurship index and the GDP of a country. Which one contributes to which? You can research yourself. But Indonesia is right now in the bottom quadrant, like with many other countries. There's also a direct correlation between digitization and a higher GDP. Again, which one is contributing to which is something that you could research on your own. Technology has been tom-tommed about doing many things. So I picked up a list of things that are supposed to happen between now, from 2019 to 2050. These are the kind of industries that are supposed to be the future in the technological space. These are the kind of skills our people will need. These are the future innovators. These are the people and the billionaires of tomorrow. And lastly, so how will all this get financed? Because that was the key question this morning as well. That world is seeing a churn of its own. We are seeing the rise of super angels. We are seeing funding getting globalized. We are seeing massive crowdfunding, either on the product side or just pure peer-to-peer lending. We are seeing the VC system being disrupted by ICO, which is what you understand as bitcoins and things like that, initial coin offerings. Banks are playing catch up. That's because they are essentially working from a position of fear. An example is that when media companies were disrupted by YouTube, they pretty much sat back and tried to protect what they had and missed the bus. We are seeing the same thing happen now in fintech. Banks are pretty much trying to protect what they have, and suddenly new companies are coming and becoming multiple times their size. We are seeing that in edutech, which I mentioned in the previous session. Peer-to-peer lending is picking up, but all of this, people are trying to fill the gaps which institutional funding is not able to do. we are seeing a clear dichotomy where a large mass of entrepreneurs don't get funded, and a few who do get successful, the unicorns, semi-unicorns, etc., suddenly have a halo effect, and they become serial entrepreneurs, and they seem to get funding without any difficulty at all. Very often, these are guys who use a ladder to go up and then pull the ladder behind them. They don't want anybody else to come. That too is happening. More importantly, financing agencies are moving from intuition-based lending or funding to quantified probabilities. Let me explain that. So while I toured on Indonesia, I saw all these problems with entrepreneurs where they can't get funding, they can't find where the investors are. The investors are struggling because they don't know which company to invest in. To them, everything looks the same. So we built, for the first time, an algorithm-driven rating system that rates startups on how fundable they are. So while we are working with entrepreneurs across the country to improve their skills, knowledge, we are then going to get into analytics and analyze their companies and see how fundable they are. And finally, we are going to bring them into an event, a distraction-free event, to get them funding. That's the full life cycle of what we're trying to do. So that's enough of background. We'll get into more of a discussion mode now. I'll give a couple of minutes for each one of my panelists to introduce themselves, say a few words about what has happened so far or their experience, and then we'll try to get as interactive as possible. Over to you, Shweta.
Thanks. So since the headline behind me says imagining the future, I have a question for all of you. How many of you either have children who are 7 or below, or no children who are 7 or below? Can we have a quick show of hands? Either you know kids who are 7 or below, right? Do you think they'll ever learn how to drive? Yes? No? No? Yeah, that's a fact, they won't. So Mr. Singh just spoke about the 4th Industrial Revolution. Now the 4th Industrial Revolution actually is moving at an extremely fast pace. Right from the 1st Industrial Revolution, which was all focused around steam and the power of steam to mechanize production. The 2nd Industrial Revolution moved into the power of electricity, how to scale or get into mass production. The 3rd Industrial Revolution focused on electronics as an industry, on how to really automate production. But currently, we are in the midst of the 4th Industrial Revolution, which is a reality. Just last week, I was transiting through Singapore, and I realized that my first interface with a human being during the check-in process at Terminal 4 was actually when I was just about to board the gate during security. 2 years ago, I would have never imagined that. It was just a whisk through. I was talking to machines. I was interacting to machines all throughout. I didn't need a human being interaction at all. Now, typically, to succeed in the 4th Industrial Revolution, where the lines between technology of physical computing and biological hemisphere get blurred, is something which is alarming to all of us. And that is why you hear a lot of terminologies these days, quantum electronics, AR, VR, artificial intelligence, whether that's good or bad. And you see a lot of leaders talking about what it can do for all our countries. Now, keeping in mind that that's a reality, the 4th Industrial Revolution is a reality, there are very few economies which are actually focusing on talent development for the 4th Industrial Revolution. On how do we really develop the youth to learn the skills which will help them succeed in what the new age era is all about. Those skills have to be nurtured at a young age. And let me share an example. At the recent Global Entrepreneurship Summit, which is going to be starting off in India, there was a statistics that the average age of an entrepreneur is 30 years and decreasing year on year. Similarly, if you look at, let's talk about Sweden. I would have loved to talk about Silicon Valley since I represent a company called Intel, which is at the heart and center of Silicon Valley. But I want to share more about Sweden right now. And there are 2 facts which are extremely interesting about Sweden as a country. One is that almost 65% of the current business comes typically from organizations which are less than 5 years old. So the average age of an organization is just 4 to 5 years old. And the second fact about the same country is that the average age of an entrepreneur is 19. That's how young it's becoming. Now the question is, how do we really prepare the young generation to learn the relevant skills which will allow them to either become employable, if there are enough jobs, or create new jobs and become an entrepreneur, get into risk-taking, creativity. Typically what we used to refer as the 21st century skills has now taken a new terminology, which is called the future skills of 2020. And the way the fourth industrial revolution is progressing, it's going to become even faster than 2020 is what we understand at Intel. So, yeah, okay. So just coming back to the new age skills which our youth need to learn to prosper, to survive in what this new environment is all about, is what as Intel is what we are focusing at, which are skills of tinkering, skills of becoming a maker essentially, using electronics as a component or a baseline so that they can interface or interact with what the new age phenomena would be all about.
So just a quick question. Your company has been, at the forefront of technological innovation and stayed ahead. How are you preparing for, the new reality of artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, which is going to change the nature of the workforce? And where are you going to get all these people?
Yeah, so that's the toughest question. Just like any organization invests in talent development, similarly we feel that the government needs to invest in pipeline development or human development for the new age technologies which are required. So we are working very closely with the ministries of multiple countries, whether that is India or Indonesia, in trying to help them create a relevant skill set for the youth to learn. So we have a program in Indonesia which is basically focused around youth, all in high school, and specifically in the SMCAs, which are the vocational high schools. We're working with almost 217 odd SMCAs today, trying to ensure that the youth learn these relevant skills and trying to make it self-sustainable for the government to scale it across to all the other youth in the country.
Super. So Charles, you are an investor and with multiple investments across the region. So what attracts you to Indonesia?
Well, first of all, I'm from Astral. It's a boutique VC, and we have been coming into Indonesia for quite some time, roughly about 2 years. But we have not, we have invested a few things, but we have not invested something that's impactful or big enough. The reason is because we're still surveying the market, even though there's lots of funds coming into Indonesia. The last statistics we have so far is from, I think, close to $1 billion has flown into Indonesia, actually. And that's lots of money. And in fact, there's too much money. And what Nalin has just mentioned earlier on, there's too much money, and yet there's not enough qualified, you might say, qualified startup that is able to make an impact to society. A lot of startups are really like followers, be it e-commerce, be it startups with a matching algorithm, or be it things like Gojek, or those kind of logistic companies. So we are looking at something that is really impactful, and that's the thing. Indonesia is big. It's one of the 4th largest country in the world, and the middle class income is getting bigger as well. Lots of people, like what you rightly mentioned, many of them are using mobile phones as well. So it's the right setup in terms of consumerization. But in terms of the regulation and in terms of the qualified startup, I think that's something that we will have to take a look.
So as Indonesia marches towards 2045 with Mr. Gita Viravan painting a very, very good picture, what are the things from an investor perspective that you think we can do to leapfrog and learn from the other countries?
Well, there's a lot of things actually. Like for example, like I'm based in Singapore, and in Singapore, you can register a company as a foreigner in 30 minutes. So that's very fast. and you can immediately buy a ticket to come to Singapore and start working and applying work permit for yourself because you are the founder of that company. So that's very fast as well. And that work permit will take you probably less than a month to get it approved. And then you are given like a 2-year period in Singapore to prove yourself. So that's very good. So Singapore is scarce in terms of resources, but we have, in fact, we have more promising startup, unfortunate to say, compared to Indonesia. The reason is because there's so many startups from all over the world coming to Singapore, and so many VCs based in Singapore, even ASR is based in Singapore. And we're trying to create an ecosystem because of the regulation as well, and also the MAS that allows VC to have tax-free for a couple of years. And we don't need to kind of declare the amount that we invest. Like in Indonesia, I invest in a few companies last year and last 2 years. For every fund transfer, we have to declare what is it for, if there's a cost of transfer. To even participate as a shareholder in a company, it takes many months, and you're subject to very tedious audit. So, you know, that makes it a bit difficult for investors like us to really do business in Indonesia. And the other thing is, of course, the education as well. But I think if we don't have resources in Indonesia, we can get it from overseas, you know, foreign talent. So I think open up to easier way for foreigners to work here, to contribute to the gap in the skill set. I think that will make a tremendous impact on the quality of the startups.
It's interesting, he says that when you look at the angel investment community, India has about 600, 800 odd active angels. Indonesia has about 100. Do you know how many Americans made angel investments last year? 500,000. So where should we be looking for money? That's the globalization of the marketplace. So there are more people willing to put money, and that's a universal theme you'll hear. Even Mr. Gita said the same thing this morning. So Pradyumna, you are in the middle. You take companies to the market to raise money from India and other parts of the world. What's your experience and outlook of Indonesia as it marches towards 2045?
Well, Indonesia is at the cusp of something great. See, one of the key things that has happened over the last few years has been the fact that we have precedents. You have precedents of valuation, you have precedents of how much money it takes to build a market. All of this has come a little bit from Indonesia, a little bit from India, a little bit from Singapore, and most of the Asian markets that all the venture capitalists have sort of dabbled with and learned their lessons from. So I think that's one of the key learnings that is going to facilitate the industry. The second thing is you have one of the largest populations, the fourth most populous country with one of the largest growing middle class, moving into a segment where the disposable incomes are growing. It's a perfect storm. You've got everything working for you, right? And when that appears to a venture capital industry, the only thing that you need to do is curtail the amount of risk involved. You know, like you just rightly mentioned, how easy are you making things for an investor to really invest money into Indonesia? So if those things are addressed, there's really a very big opportunity here in terms of venture capital itself. So I see that to be one of the key things, key reasons why somebody like us who helps companies raise capital finds Indonesia as a very exciting opportunity.
It's interesting you say we're on the cusp of a great opportunity. I say that too. We're on the cusp of a generational opportunity. Back home in India, I often asked my father, because my grandfather, I never saw him, that when the country was going through its independence movement in the 1930s and 40s, and Mahatma Gandhi was marching towards the sea to create salt in rebellion of the British, and you must have had similar situations here in the same time frame. What was my grandfather doing? Why is he not a freedom fighter? Was he pro-British? Was he hiding somewhere? Did he not want to take a risk? I say that because I think 30, 40 years later, our children and grandchildren will ask us the same question, that when economic and entrepreneurial independence came about, where were you? Why did you not take a chance? Why did you not do something? So yes, it's a great opportunity, but from the lessons that you've seen in other parts of the world, what do you think we need to really do to propel ourselves to this 2045? Because there's an opportunity with technology to leapfrog the learning of other countries. What would some of those things be?
You actually covered a little bit of it, Nalin, when you were going through the slides. One of the best things that you can do is you as a government understand the fact that Indonesia is at this place right now where venture capital can come in. Once you take cognizance of that fact, the next thing is how do you educate one at a lawmaker level, at a policy and governance level, and the second one at an entrepreneurial level. How do you educate them to be better entrepreneurs, to be able to raise this capital, to be able to expand faster, to be able to attract the kind of talent that they need to sustain innovation. And the second thing is, if the government gets really involved, what kind of support is it giving? You know, for example, for startup, one of the key things that India has sort of done, you know, India for me is a great market to mimic because it's learned its lessons over the last 5 years, which are available as case studies, right? So one of the key things that India has done is fostered the community, fostered the startup community, made it more accessible, made the media more in line with talking about the startup and the venture capital ecosystem. So as you keep seeing a lot of positivity build up, as you see the number of unicorns building up, what also happens is the entrepreneurial community starts waking up to the fact that they can also be the future billionaires, or they can also be the future millionaires. And that kind of hope and optimism is the best thing that you can create as an economy.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
You want to add to
just
that?
about to say to add to that is that yeah, it's important. Like in Singapore, we have this saying that if it fails, right, just blame the government. And in that sense, it's partly true as well, because like you know, to make it you know, that kind of good environment, first thing first, right, you got to make sure that it starts from the education. So like for example, schools that is a classroom that's designed to be not sitting in a straight row, but in a circular manner, things like to create that interaction, the participation, and also syllabus to create some kind of creativity thinking towards it instead of memorization, stuff like that. Like recently, Israel invested in a Norwegian company, and last year we exited. It went IPO 3 years ago. So after the third year, we are able to exit, you know, in that sense. So when I look at the Scandinavian countries, you know, these people, I mean, Norway is a very small country. It has only like 5.5 million people, but there's so many startups there. And they are willing to take risks. The reason is because in a school, they stick with the same form teacher for 6 years. In the first 6 years of their education life, right, is with the same teacher to nurture them in those aspects that they don't study in a normal syllabus. Things like the welfare, the thought process, you know, things like that. So they grow up able to challenge the world, able to challenge anything, and very independent in terms of thinking. So when I look at, you know, the founders, right, when we put in the money, the founders are kind of different, depends on the culture. You know, like every country has its own culture. And Scandinavian people, the culture is different as well. So I think the best thing for Indonesia is not to change the culture, but to change the education, hopefully can impact somewhat towards changing the mindset.
There's a key difference. In Scandinavian countries, they actually teach innovation as a subject,
Yeah.
which most of the developing economies are not even looking at as a possibility. And risk-taking is part of that.
Yeah. It's difficult to create a nation of entrepreneurs if you only teach them how to work for somebody else. So, Haris, you have been traveling with me to various parts of Indonesia, meeting entrepreneurs. You are part of the Makers group as well. We see this tremendous talent and tremendous desire to do something. What exactly holds people back here?
Okay, I think there's a few problems that exist within the startups and makers. First, let's discuss with the makers. A lot of makers here, they are able to create stuff. They design stuff really well. The only problem is they don't know where to go from there. Like me currently, we're in a movement called Berkarya Indonesia, which means to create, Indonesia to create. So the aim of this movement is to change the mindset of Indonesian from a consumptive behavior into a productive pattern. So we're trying to solve this problem by creating a lot of workshops on a certain level. The first level will be from zero to maker. is how we educate all those people who are, they have a lot of ideas, they have a lot of, well, they have a lot of skills, but they don't know what to make. So we created this workshop, and we, on technology that is currently trending, like 3D printing, Internet of Things, virtual reality, we created a workshop called 3D prototyping design, in which it's a technology, 3D printing is a technology that is very common outside of Indonesia, and I believe it should be common here as well. In the United States, they have this store called Micro Center, where you can actually just get 3D printer and put it in the trolley. It's that common. So we created this type of workshop to teach the kids specifically how to make. That's the one side. And secondly, after you become the makers, this is a lot of problems that makers currently have. They're afraid that their creation would be stolen by somebody else. They're unaware there's this thing called intellectual property. And it's one of the things that we do that, as you said before, that we're going through to all these 20 cities in Indonesia. This year, probably 34, all the province for the next 2 years, to educate all those people about how to be an entrepreneur, basically. And so that's from the step from zero to maker. And then what's the next step? Maker to market. And that's where you come on board, where we carry workshop about how to get funded, what are the things that investors need, what are the things that as a startup, the problem is that startups and investors here, they speak different language. I'm not talking about Bahasa or English, but as you said, like a lot of startup here that investor approached them and said, okay, we're very interested in what you have, and I want to invest $10 million with convertible note with 20% conversion cap. They just went silent. They don't know what that is. So we do this workshop to make them understand the language that investors speak, for them to be able to communicate, yeah, more or less.
So it's an interesting point he made about people being afraid of their ideas being stolen. It's a universal thing, more so in developing countries. I always give them the example of the famous chef Gordon Ramsay. Age is catching up. Gordon Ramsay. He comes on TV and tells his biggest secrets on television. He tells you the recipe, and he even shows you how to cook it. Can you open a restaurant like him next door? You can't. It's in the execution. So if it is something patented, patent it. Otherwise, don't worry too much about how somebody may steal your idea. Just taking it a little further, so Shweta, your company has been at the forefront of innovation, incubating companies, setting up the centers and ecosystems for entrepreneurs to thrive in. I know that from my India experience. What about Indonesia?
So Indonesia, the maker ecosystem is still evolving, and I'll be very honest here. It is as an ecosystem, the skills which need to be nurtured right at the school level, there's a lot of work which needs to go in there. Right from making as a concept to entrepreneurship or risk-taking as skills which need to be learned, to the whole idea of thinking innovatively, thinking out of the box, thinking critically is something which is new to the formal education system here. Till we continue these options as an out-of-school informal education activity, it works well. But the minute or unless we actually integrate this into the formal education system, it will never become systemic in nature. And that, unfortunately, will never help grow the number of entrepreneurs in the country. If you look at the average age of a person who starts a unicorn is somewhere between 30, 35, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Which means that the risk of entrepreneur or the ideas of entrepreneurship need to be sowed in much earlier, or the ability to be able to learn new skills, go apply for patents, need to be fed in at a far more earlier stage when they're just in high school or maybe early college, which are things which the government needs to look at and how to make it more systemic. There are two very, very critical missing elements here. One is access to infrastructure. Talking about countries which actually succeed in having young entrepreneurs or unicorns, again talking about Sweden. So you're talking about 100 Mbps available to every citizen. You're talking about subsidies on personal computers available in every home. That is the access, easy access to infrastructure which is required for the fourth industrial revolution. And the other is ease of policy. People have spoken about the ability to register themselves. What about the taxations? That itself has to be friendly enough to allow a country to become progressive as a startup nation.
Yep.
So Charles, this is for you and Pradyumna. So when you see the bouquet of entrepreneurs from across the region, what exactly attracts you to a particular country or a particular kind of entrepreneur? What are those traits or things you're looking for?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question because I think it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, I was assessing a proposal, so I met with the founder. So we went for lunch, and we just ordered drinks. So we ordered iced lemon tea, and it was a la carte. So we decided maybe let's have lunch, So we say, okay, the lunch set comes with iced lemon tea as well. So I was just talking to the restaurant manager to say, hey, can you just waive off the a la carte iced lemon tea since we're ordering lunch? It's not the price of the tea, it's just the principle of it, right? So the manager, of course, said, yeah, sure. But the founder was a bit taken back, and he was like, oh my God, why do you do that? Like, is it the right thing to do? Or, why do we have to ask? It's just $4 whatsoever. Things like that. So obviously, right, those little details of traits of a founder, whether are you a risk taker or how do you present yourself and how do you actually be tactful and things like that. I mean, those play a part as a basic character, or we call it the hygiene factor of a founder, that because you're going to give soul to something that you are starting up, right? And, so that's very important. That's one step. The other one, right, is of course the business idea. We have lots of proposals, but it's very hard because most of the business proposal is all talking about how to make money for the company, but they forgot about how to make money or ROI for the investor. They just say very basic plan. Oh, you can exit, you can convert your shares or things like that. So it's very basic, but they have no clue. So that's the problem because most of the proposal, they finish off the proposal. By right, they should just finish 60%, and then they should do some kind of a matchmaking to talk to the investor to finish the other 40%, so that they can actually do a proper proposal. But then they don't, right? So I think these are very important things to know who you're talking to in terms of the particular investor, because every investor has its own different interests. And the other one is make sure that at least you need to have the basic traits in terms of those characteristics, the go-getter, the do or die, people that will go for it and will work hard and persevere, those kind of stuff. Yeah, those are very important.
So Pradyumna, just to rephrase that question in two parts. One, what are the future technologies that people are looking to invest into? And secondly, do people invest in the person or the idea?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So I'll add on to Charles's answer. So I think, for us, we're in a very selfish business. If the company raises money, we make money. So we need to back something, right? We need to back an idea or we need to back the team. And it's the same thing for an investor as well. What do they back? Because you might have the most intelligent of ideas that you would have ever concocted, but if it just does not make any sense to the venture capital community, that's because the venture capital community does not see business value in it, right? Not that there are no investors for a social or an impact-based business, but those investors look at it very differently, right? You need to know very, very certainly that this is the kind of investor that you're looking at, and the core strength has to be the kind of promoter you are, the kind of team that you have, the kind of dedication that you really have to a business or an idea. So I think that dedication is more important than just an idea, Nalin. In terms of what technology is going to, is going to be there, I think it's anybody's guess. More than 5 years from today, I don't think anybody can guess what the technology of tomorrow is going to be or what the next big revolution is going to be, right? In the last 5 years, surprisingly, just like land, water, air, I think the World Economic Forum classified data as an asset, right? And how do you define data? How do you quantify data? Nobody knows. But there are multiple utilizations of this data, which is generating trillions of dollars of value in exchanges across the world. So in the last 5 years, something unimaginable happened where asset was completely in the air, right? Not even in the air, right? Air still has substance. But data is what value you derive out of it. So, but I see over the next 5 years, I think, Shweta would be a better judge of technology because she would be tracking and trailing the new developments. But I think one of the key things is going to be the artificial intelligence and machine learning. Investors have got that angle already, have started looking extensively, but the kind of proliferation of internet, data, and communication devices is obviously going to push the entire world to a more efficient way, to a more digitized way of living. And these are tools that will, in essence, speed up the way we are adding value into the ecosystem.
Okay, so one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. So for Shweta and Charles, so we have seen technology do wonderful things to people's lives, but also not do such good things. So we have a situation, for example, in some countries of jobless growth. Is there an ethical question of how quickly we should adopt when people are actually losing jobs?
Okay, so let me try and answer that question. There are a lot of leaders who speak about universal basic income. And personally, I would back that idea. Because there's no way we can stop the advent of technology. There's no way we can stop what fourth industrial revolution would mean for us. Now, we don't know whether AI is good or bad. It's a risk which all entrepreneurs are taking, including big organizations. But fact of the day is, there are concepts on how do you ethically manage a country, an organization, and ourselves individually to keep ourselves safe and secure.
Charles, you are funding this stuff?
Yeah. I mean,
how do you feel?
I'm just saying that, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's like there's no way to stop, technology. I mean, it's coming. But I just want to say that humans are very adaptable. I mean, you have no idea that you can actually swim so well if a boat is sinking, actually, in the sea. You can have a newfound talent, right? So if, just a good example, right, is that, from Uber to Airbnb and, everybody's complaining about, we're losing jobs and stuff like that. But, but everybody just have workarounds and adapt to it. So I think it's fine as long as you're not going to, lose anybody's life or anything, so it's fine.
Let me just add another thing to it. So artificial intelligence, at the end of it, the intelligence comes from the humans. So it depends on how good, bad, or ugly it is.
In fact, right, I want to talk about the artificial intelligence because this is a very interesting topic, especially from an investor standpoint. Because first of all, it's a very cool technology. And secondly, right, the cost of processing such data has tremendously dropped. Now we have cloud computing. If you ask, and actually this technology is not new. It's like 20 years ago, everybody's talking about it. In fact, some of the startups, they're using the same algorithm, and it's free, open source, for example. So it's not new. It's just about trying to repackage it and apply it to a certain use case or lifestyle, and that's all. But the cool thing about artificial intelligence right now for investors is that, first of all, as what you mentioned, it improves lives. But secondly, right, we can see a very interesting, what we call consumerization. So, for example, you have natural language processing, you have something that you can do on your mobile, and a lot of consumers will adapt to it, and that's especially true if, let's say, the population is very big. So that's one of the reasons your first question to me, right, why we are looking at Indonesia is because of that.
Especially in healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare as well, things like that. Yeah, so if, let's say, we can apply AI in Indonesia, we have 260 million population. I mean, think about the tremendous benefit to even like 10% of that population using smartphone. Yeah.
Now, just to draw a parallel, couple of years when Facebook was at its peak, it was growing with a virality coefficient of something like 2.4. everybody said, hey, this is when people will stop talking, people will stop meeting up, everything will happen through Facebook, and here we are. Right? It's how you use it to improve your life, not so much replacing life itself.
Harris, you have a point of view on the ethics of it?
I think I agree as well. It's about what you need rather than what you have. A question for Charles as well, that 30 years ago, there's a movie that's it's a movie about artificial intelligence gone berserk from a company called Skynet. What are the odds of that happening? Since you're very interested in artificial intelligence.
Well, I mean, it's like...
It's Terminator, by the way.
Yeah.
So 2001?
2001.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, I mean, it's like, first of all, right, a lot of, you see, so that's a problem with us investors in the sense that we have all these proposals, some of them with AI, but it just doesn't make sense, right? Like, for example, people talk about natural language processing and try to map back to the relevant e-services through your voice and things like that, and give intelligent answers, things like that, and it's machine learning. But a lot of times, people like to talk to human beings, right, through call center or something like that. So some of these proposals that doesn't really work. But if we apply it even to healthcare, or if we apply it to to the Internet of Things, for example, like one of things that we're looking at is, which I'm also starting, is in Thailand. Hopefully that will be my third IPO. 3 years or 4 years later, you can ask me about it. But it's about the getting the audience behavior from the internet. So how we do that is that we will try to use the technology to harness their consumption pattern, what video they watch, or what things they read, contextually, doing semantic analysis, and try to run the data mining engine, and try to infer in terms of whether even your demographics or infer your interests, things like that. So, and then with machine learning, we can actually start to recommend and do some kind of a predictive modeling to kind of suggest services, products, or things like that. So without you even thinking that you need it. It's like a virtual salesman, yeah. So that's something that, it applies. It's like an application from a Terminator.
Scary that a machine would know more about what I want than myself.